Welcome to today's webinar on our ADS for Rural America project. I'm Christine Rogantine with the University of Iowa, and this webinar is focused on the overall experience and perceptions of our participants and safety drivers. This is our third webinar in a series of 5. If you'd like to view our first 2 webinars, the first was on our safety management plan and the second was on our vehicle hardware and software. You can view those at our website at adsforruralamerica.uiowa.edu, which I'll put that link in the chat for you. So throughout the webinar, please submit any questions you have into the Q&A feature and we'll try to answer them at the end. And now I'll introduce Omar Ahmad, our Center's Deputy Director and the Project Manager for our ADS for Rural America project, who will start the presentation. So go ahead, Omar.
Thank you, Christine. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So today's webinar is on the rider and safety driver experiences of the folks who've been involved with the ADS for Rural America demonstration grant project. Our webinar today is organized as follows. I'll first give you all a very brief project overview. And as Christine mentioned, well, we've had 2 other webinars before. And so if you're looking for more information about our project, you can go to the website that she'll share a link to. And then through that website, you can also get to the other webinars where you can get more details about the project itself. So I'll be giving you all the overview, and then I'll talk briefly about the ridership, the folks, the participant passengers who've come along for the ride with us. And then my colleague, Cher Carney, will talk about the rider experience, and then my colleague, Cheryl Rowe, will talk about the safety driver experience. And then we'll have time at the end for your questions as well. So the ADS for Rural America project was funded under the U.S. Demonstration Grant Program. And when we were in the planning stages of this project, we looked at the testing, the AV testing that was being done across the country. And it was clear that testing on rural roadways was very much underrepresented in those in the testing efforts that were already taking place. So testing on rural roadways is very important because while a smaller segment of the population lives in rural areas, half of all traffic fatalities occur on rural roadways. And if automated vehicles are going to realize their promise of improving safety, then they need to do so. Then they need to improve safety on all roadways, including rural roadways. Another important component of this is looking at the populations that live in rural areas. So the US has an aging population, and many older folks choose to live in rural areas. The challenge with living in a rural area is that you have little or no access to public transportation. And as we age, being independent is equivalent to having the freedom and the ability to move from one location to another, and especially to go to places that you need to go to, such as a healthcare center, which typically is not in rural areas, typically involves travel to a regional location. So automated vehicles present an amazing opportunity for folks in rural areas, especially older folks, to remain mobile as they age. Throughout this webinar, we are going to show videos of our passenger participants sharing their experiences. These riders participated in one of the first 4 phases in our project. And so I'm going to share a video with you now. When asked about how automated vehicles may benefit people in the future, this is what one of our participants had to say.
So you see that as a potential benefit for you and for others who.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a lot of people, because I've got friends that are also in jail. They can't go anywhere because they don't have transportation. And transportation has always been a huge setback for people in wheelchairs. You know, if you want to do something, you know, on a Sunday, you can't unless you get somebody else that can drive you. The rural community for Iowa have been complaining about transportation for as long as I can remember. So, you know, because first of all, they don't have a driver, they don't have a car. Now it goes all back to that. And, you know, if you're lucky enough, you can get a bus that's close, but not always. So, especially for the rural community. Bring me one of those cars so I can use it.
You want the car right
I
now.
want it now.
Yep.
You know.
It sure would be great if we could. We got a little ways to go before that's gonna happen, but.
So our project utilizes a transit vehicle, an automated transit vehicle, and it's shown here in this photograph. And this vehicle drives on a 47-mile loop through 4 communities in eastern Iowa. And there are 4 stops along this route. And the 4 stops are representative of places where people may want to go. There's a marketplace, there's a community center, there's a casino, and then there's a public library. And we chose this route to include as many different types of roadways as we could, roadways that were very, very representative of roadways that an automated vehicle would have to travel on in rural areas. So we have roadways that are paved and have really great lane markings, but we also have roadways that have poor lane markings or no lane markings at all. In addition, we have unpaved or gravel roadways on this route. We have driven this route, this 47-mile route, during all 4 seasons in Iowa, and we drive it at different times of the day, in the morning, during the day, at night. This route has been mapped in high definition, and that mapping was done by our technology partner, Manley Communications. And the automation software that's on this vehicle utilizes the map to support the automation, and it's an integral part of what it needs in order to be able to drive this route under automation. So our data collection spans about 2 years, and it's been organized into 6 phases. And the complexity or the capability of the automation has increased with each successive phase. So initially the vehicle was able to drive in automation on interstates and on highways only. But then as we progressed through the phases of this project, the vehicle was able to drive in urban areas through lighted intersections under automation, and then on gravel roadways. And then most recently, we completed a phase in which we had some V2V communication between vehicles, and our vehicle was able to recognize and stop for another vehicle that was acting like a school bus, a stop school bus along our route. So at this point, we've completed 5 phases. So even though we've completed 5 phases, this webinar presents data from the first 4 phases of this project. I'm going to talk briefly about the ridership, the folks who've been passengers on this vehicle with us. And as I mentioned, the US has an aging population, and many older folks live in rural areas. So AVs present an amazing opportunity for these folks to be able to remain mobile. So we are recruiting folks to participate in the study and ride in the automated vehicle with us. And we are recruiting folks from the 4 communities that are along the route. To be a participant in our study, we're looking for people that are 65 years of age or older, or people who are 25 years of age and older and have either a mobility or a visual impairment. So folks, we have them meet us at a specific location, and then once they get in the vehicle with us, they ride the entire route with us. And while they're in the vehicle, we ask them to wear a device on their wrist, which we use to collect physiological data. And then we also administer surveys to these folks to get data on their perception and trust in AVs, and also on the level of their anxiety at different locations on the route.
Well, I want to live independently as long as I can, and that's one of the limiting factors. I live outside of town, and I would like to have the opportunity to be able to be as mobile and active as I am now.
And to come up to Iowa City, it's so, I mean, Iowa City's got the best known hospital. But if you're out there, and you need something, how are you gonna get from point A to point B when you don't have a car or any of that? You gotta have, and if you order a shuttle from the university and they'll come get you, but that schedule you're on their schedule, not your schedule. So if you get done early, you might have to wait a day and stay in the hospital to get back to your house.
If that van was going to be used to transport individuals over the age of 65, people who are in rest homes that have to get taken to the grocery store or to the doctor or that, I think it's going to be a real tough sell to a lot of people in that age generation in the year 2022 who are not familiar with all the advances that are being made with AI and the rest of the technology.
Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cher Carney, who will talk about the rider experience from the first 4 phases of this project. Cher.
Thanks, Omar. So yeah, we're collecting a lot of data as part of the study in order to examine how and why riders' perceptions of the technology might change with their exposure to the vehicle. So we collect demographic data, including their age and education, exposure to advanced driver assistance systems, and typical driving patterns, as well as a lot more demographic information. We also collect questionnaire data, both pre and post drive. Riders are asked about their level of trust in automation and how safe and reliable they feel these systems are, and about any anxiety that they might have regarding certain driving situations. As Omar mentioned, each rider wears a medical grade sensor on their wrist to collect measures like heart rate variability and galvanic skin response to get at levels of anxiety during the ride. We collect a 10-minute baseline before the drive begins, and then they do wear that device for the entire duration of the trip. Researchers also ask riders to provide ratings of anxiety on a tablet. You can see a picture of the tablet. It's an iPad, and they use this to record their anxiety both before the drive begins and then again at 9 different locations during the drive. And then we also collect video data of the riders. We're interested in seeing the amount of time that they spend monitoring the center information display. And you can see that there's a picture of that also on the slide. The display is located in the front of the shuttle, and it provides them information regarding whether the vehicle is in automated mode or whether it's being driven by the safety driver. So you can see the blue portion with the steering wheel up there is what alerts the rider to the fact that the vehicle is being driven in automation. So we think that this might give some indication of the rider's level of comfort with the system. So the data that I'm going to be talking about today is through phase 4 of the project, since we just recently completed phase 5. We have had 108 riders, split pretty evenly by gender, with 55 males and 53 females. 13% of our riders have had some type of mobility impairment. and only 3% have had a visual impairment, meaning that they have a visual acuity of less than 20/70 or difficulty seeing even when they're wearing their glasses. We have a very educated ridership with over 90% having some education beyond high school. All but one of our riders reported having a driver's license, and all of reported having access to a vehicle. About 60% report that in a typical month they drive themselves daily. We should note, however, that other studies that we've conducted here at the University of Iowa and elsewhere on rural populations have shown similar results. So we see that even though older adults continue to drive, they typically drive only during the day. They take short trips. They avoid traveling out of town or when there's any types of inclement weather. So it can be very limiting for them. Nearly half of our riders agreed that they would like a car with all of the latest technology features.
I bought a new Ford in 2019 to have lane control, to have the backlighting and so forth, because I figured at 92 years old, I was at a point where I needed to have a car that would have these kind of capabilities.
I was thinking maybe someday that I'd buy one of those cars. As I'm 82 years old, I'm thinking, you know, my next car, maybe I'll get one that's got all those gadgets to be a little safer. But then riding with the van, I'm thinking, well, maybe this thing isn't quite there yet, and maybe I'll just continue to drive my Cadillac until it kicks out on me, and I'll wait for the next iteration and make sure it works well. So kind of I didn't think it was as sophisticated as I expected it to be.
Okay.
So for the purpose of the pre-drive questionnaire, we had to introduce the riders to the concept of a highly automated vehicle and what that meant. So we told them that a highly automated vehicle is one that's capable of driving on its own in some situations, but is aware of its limitations and calls for the driver to take over when necessary. We told them that for parts of the drive, the safety driver will be operating the vehicle, and for other parts of the drive, the vehicle will be driving in automated mode, and the safety driver will be monitoring the vehicle. So that being said, before the ride, 55% of the riders agreed that the vehicle was reliable and 51% agreed that they could trust it. And then after they'd had a chance to experience riding in the vehicle, I said that those who trusted the vehicle increased to 72%, and those who agreed that the vehicle was reliable increased to 77%. So these results kind of emphasize the fact that experience can make a big difference in people's opinions and perceptions, and will likely play an important role in acceptance.
It definitely improved, because in the beginning I was probably operating more with, you know, some of the horror stories about the accidents that have happened to date with the vehicles that are out there currently. So I did feel more comfortable, you know, seeing its actual use and how it seemed like the system was keeping in mind all the possible, you know, problems like.
So on this slide, you can see that the figure shows a combination of the data from all four phases as the vehicle was capable of driving in automated mode on the highway from the very beginning of the project. With each phase, we did tweak the software to make the ride smoother and a little bit more naturalistic. However, this did not affect the results from one phase to another. In each of the four phases, we saw a marked increase by about 20% in riders' trust in the vehicle's ability to drive in automation on the highway after they'd experienced it. So riders' trust in the ability of the automation to drive on city streets did not change much pre-drive versus post-drive. We saw 72% versus 79% agreeing that they would trust it, pre versus post-drive. Notice that the trust in the automation is lower for city driving than what we saw for on the interstate. In post-drive, we saw 80% versus 97%. When we look at riders' trust of the automation to respond to traffic lights, we see a big difference between the beginning phases, so phases 1 and 2, when the automation was not used to travel through the intersections. I think that maybe the riders were paying attention to whether or not the automation was being used by looking at the center information display, and when they didn't see it being used, didn't experience it, their trust decreased. But in phases 3 and 4, where the automation was being used to detect and respond to the traffic signals, we saw trust in the vehicle automation increased.
My husband and I both thought that it was a lot more scary in town. And we both said, well, now, we're not going real fast. So if something happens, we're probably not going to get hurt. But it wasn't a good feeling to be in a situation like that where we didn't trust that the machine could figure out. I guess I'm more of an older, careful, safe driver, so I don't like any unexpected surprises. So yes, it took corners fast, it stopped fast, it went fast, and that sort of bothered me, but then again, I've ridden with a teenager, so.
There were some things that I found a little disconcerting. Things that happened that seemed to be rapid, like if we were on the road and a car passed us and pulled in front of us, there'd be a sudden deceleration to keep the following distance, and those kinds of sudden activations were a little disconcerting.
So riders' trust of the automation to drive on gravel roads increased significantly once they were able to experience it. In phases 1 through 3, the vehicle was driven by the safety driver on the gravel roadway, and the riders' trust in the automation on this roadway was low, and it didn't change much across phases or post drive. However, in phase 4, we had some updates to the map and the automation software that enabled the vehicle to drive on the gravel portion of the route. Riders saw the automation, they were able to see it in action, and the trust in the vehicle's ability went from 45% pre-drive to 80% post-drive.
It was fine out in the rural area with the gravel roads, which surprised me because there isn't a center line to gauge on. So that did a good job of that. But then again, there isn't much out there except some Amish buggies. I just thought that mostly when we would come from one type of road surface to another, the machine was having to make decisions that we weren't sure it was able to do quickly enough, because you can slide on gravel. And then we thought, how would this really work in an Iowa winter with ice and snow and potholes like you gotta dodge, and this has got to be kind of tricky for the engineers.
I don't know about a road that's snow covered or icy or doesn't have a solid bed of gravel, but I think the technology has moved ahead so that it doesn't have to be on a paved or macadam road. It could certainly be on a gravel hard surface road. I'd have no qualifications at all.
Our riders used a tablet to provide their ratings of anxiety, both before their drive as a baseline measure, and then again at 9 different locations along the route. So these locations included highway driving, both in town and out, in downtown areas, on the gravel roadway, on blacktop, as well as after merges and different types of intersections. The scale was 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest level of anxiety possible. And as you can see from these figures on the slide, the average ratings were very low for all of the phases. That's the figure on the left. And even though the percent of the route driven in automation increased from phase 1 to phase 4, and the percent driven by the safety driver decreased, we did not see a significant change in anxiety across phases. There were 2 locations, if you look at the figure on the right, where the average anxiety ratings were just slightly higher than the baseline. And these were locations where the vehicle was required to interact with other traffic that was traveling at high speeds. So the merge onto the interstate and the turn onto the highway. I think, yeah, this begs the question as to why their anxiety was so low. So maybe we'll listen to a couple riders and see what they say.
I wasn't anxious at all in terms of going through the experience. I'm not anxious at all. I would do it again tomorrow and have no qualifications or no hesitation whatsoever.
I felt very sure that all precautions were taken into account in the development process, and I didn't have any concerns that there would be anything to be concerned for safety, or really felt confident that if you were at the stage of having public participation in this, that it was well along.
So after each of our drives, we took a few minutes with the passengers and asked them to give us feedback. We asked for any questions that they had, and we got a couple of really great, well, we got more than a couple, but we got some great comments from the riders, like this one here about it feeling like riding with an inexperienced teenager. We heard that from several people, that it did not anticipate things like they would, so there was hard braking, that it accelerated aggressively. But we also heard that it was overly cautious in some cases, especially at intersections and stop signs. So now I am going to turn it over to my colleague Cheryl Rowe, who was one of our safety drivers, or is one of our safety drivers on this project, and she's going to talk about the safety driver experience.
Thank you, Cher. As Cher mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about our safety driver experience. During this, I'm going to cover the roles, the qualifications, our training, the data being collected, as well as of our perceptions about driving the vehicle. Our safety drivers have been driving since phase 5. Two of the 4 drivers that we have been driving since phase 5. One driver has been driving since phase 2, and one has been driving since phase 3. The safety driver's responsibility is the safe operation of the vehicle. Safe operation requires the driver to have a thorough understanding of the automation strengths and weaknesses, or their limitations. Our drivers use this knowledge to know when to engage and disengage the automation. We've been trained to drive with both hands on the steering wheel, regardless of the automation status. The image on the left represents the safety driver interface. This was designed for periodic glances, like checking a mirror, to gain insight into the automation's ability to see the environment. It should be noted that our safety driver operates the transit with another team member or co-pilot. The co-pilot's responsibility is to monitor the automation status and communicate any feedback when necessary. Our communication strategy continues with the entire team after each testing or data collection drive. We host post-drive debriefings where we share information about the automation's behavior and interactions with vulnerable road users. These meetings ensure that every research team member has a thorough understanding of the current capabilities of the automation. Our safety drivers are NADS employees who have been approved by the University of Iowa to operate university-owned vehicles. Each driver and co-pilot have several years of experience dealing with various advanced vehicle systems. We've been trained with our partners at the University of Iowa Campus Services, where they led classroom and on-road driving sessions with our drivers that covered the general operation handling of the transit, vehicle safety inspections, as well as interactions with our passengers. Our initial ADS training was provided by our technology partner, Autonomous Stuff. They covered items such as types of sensors being used, their role in the automation, and the strengths and limitations associated with each sensor. Effective communication strategies were also discussed. As Omar mentioned previously, with each phase of this project, the automation becomes more complex. Our safety drivers are intimately involved at each step of the process, from development through safety driver testing and into data collection. They provide insight for updates, assist with remote sessions, and validate the automation's updates with the technology partner on site. These validation drives allow the safety drivers the opportunity to discuss the changes, experience them firsthand with the provider, and provide feedback that can be incorporated to fine-tune the automation's performance for the upcoming phase. This fine-tuning could be related to the speed of the vehicle, the path of the vehicle, which can improve both the driving and the rider experience. Prior to data collection, the automation software becomes locked down or unable to be modified. At this time, our safety drivers complete several drives that mimic the upcoming data collection drives regarding starting locations and times. This added exposure allows the drivers the ability to identify locations where the automation will be engaged and disengaged, as well as locations where the automation may be challenged. The safety driver data is available as part of our publicly available data set. Like the passengers, our safety drivers wear medical grade sensors on the wrist, which collect physiological data like heart rate variability and galvanic skin response. The video data from the driver is collected at each drive. You can see from this image that you can get a clear representation of the driver's face and possibly understand their hand position and scanning patterns. Safety drivers also complete a post-drive survey, which is similar to what our riders complete. They will assess their comfort level when driving an automation and when automation is engaged in various settings, road types, weather, road condition changes, and different situations, such as if pedestrians are present or in congested traffic. They are also asked to rate their level of concern when interacting with vehicles, with pedestrians, bicyclists, or even their level of concern with the ability of the system to interact with other vehicles or the system's performance in general. Our safety drivers have indicated high levels of confidence with their abilities to safely monitor and operate the transit safely, even when handling an unexpected situation. Our levels of concern have been negligible across each phase. We believe our confidence is a direct result of our previous and ongoing knowledge and exposure, our preparation, and our communication strategies. It is important that we approach every drive with confidence in ourselves, in the automation, and in our team members. However, we have to be careful not to let that lead to complacency. We must remain focused and vigilant. Next slide. Every drive is an opportunity for our drivers to learn something new, an opportunity to learn something about the automation's capabilities. The more exposure we have, the more comfortable we become, the more aware we become with identifying the environmental factors that may alter the automation's behavior. When does wind become a factor? At what point does the rain or the snow become a factor? At what point do I, as a safety driver, need to disengage and drive manually? Each exposure also helps the team identify locations on the route, situations on the road that may challenge the automation, that may require a heightened awareness by the safety driver. Heightened awareness has been noted at various traffic lights and stop signs throughout our route. Heightened awareness is also needed in the areas of the route with lower exposure, like the gravel road, which became part of the automation in phase 4. The automated vehicle can handle driving on the gravel just fine. However, the automation's behavior required modifications so that it would drive towards the center of the gravel road and then nudge itself to the right as vehicles approached. We have very low exposure to having automation engaged with oncoming vehicles present. The image on this slide represents one of the 2 encounters on the gravel road while an automation was engaged. You may be able to see from this image why the safety driver decided to disengage the automation. You might not even see the vehicle because of the glare from the sun. And the point at which the 2 vehicles would meet would be right in the middle of the curve. During our testing phases, we've attempted to put research vehicles out on the gravel so that we could be exposed to these situations. That does help, but it's just not the same as interacting with natural traffic. Next slide. Next slide.
We lost your audio, Sherry.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. My apologies. As a safety driver, I've been asked, what is the scariest thing you've ever experienced? I can't really answer that question because I'm not scared. I am in control of the vehicle. I am confident in my abilities to operate the vehicle. I think the question really is, what are the challenges of the automation? I think as situations become more challenging for a human, they become more challenging for the automation as well. This could be environmental changes related to weather, traffic density, construction, rapidly decreasing speeds, vehicle cut-ins, or even debris in the road. These situations could also be location-based. I'm sure we all have had an intersection we wish to avoid. The image on this slide highlights the spot on the route that is the least favorite turn for me to drive manually and with automation engaged. It is a challenging turn. It's a left turn from a stop sign onto a road with cross traffic traveling at 55 miles per hour. That alone is challenging, but we're driving a larger vehicle with also additional turn lanes. The position of the stop sign can also obscure your view to the right. Safety drivers have disengaged the automation for this turn numerous times, usually because the automation may choose a gap that the driver is uncomfortable with, a gap that may not allow enough time for the turn to be completed safely. As we approach our final phase of the project, we are confident that our exposure and our communication strategies will continue leading our path to a better understanding of the automation's capabilities on our route. This concludes my discussion on the safety driver's experience. You will now hear from a few of our passengers regarding how their anxiety level may have changed if a safety driver wasn't present.
Oh yes, if there wasn't another driver there, I would probably be looking to put my foot on the brake myself or something. I mean, no, I think it needed a safety driver.
If you wouldn't have been there, I would have been much more anxious.
I have enough faith in the engineers and the scientists that are working on this that they're not going to stick me in something that's going to be dangerous. But I will say this: if you had me do the same trip that I just took, and that I took that road in that van with a safety driver for a couple hours, then you said, okay, now we're going to let the van do it by itself without a safety driver. Based on that first ride that I'd say, wait a minute, I'm not real comfortable with this because the safety driver took over too many times. You know, let's wait a while.
Even though I have a lifetime's experience working with computers, I'm not sure that I'm at the point where I'm willing to give up total control.
Fair enough.
Experience has taught me that there may be something that you overlooked, and there's always that unanswered question: what's missed? What question did not get asked?
And with that, I'm going to leave you with one final quote from one of our writers. Based on this short ride, I'd never want to be in a driverless car. The test just proved to me that the engineers have a long way to go to make it safe and feasible.
Okay, thank you to all of our presenters and to some of our participants who allowed us to interview them on video. I wanted to do a quick announcement to let people know that the name of our research unit is very soon going to be changing from the University of Iowa National Advanced Driving Simulator to the University of Iowa Driving Safety Research Institute. Because as evidence from this and many of our other projects, we do a lot of on-road research in addition to studies using our driving simulators. So that name will be official in the next couple weeks. Now we'll go on to our Q&A portion. So we've gotten some good questions in from the registrants and ones live. So we'll start, let's see. We are interested in the Iowa experience and operation in terms of vehicle speed in various circumstances, especially in the presence of objects such as other vehicles or pedestrians. How does the vehicle do in such circumstances if in automated mode?
I can take that question, Christine. So this is a really good question. And I think as we, and I'll answer it in two parts. So as we think about automated vehicles, speed is a really big challenge for a highly automated vehicle. We all have vehicles now that using adaptive cruise control and other ADAS related technologies, it's fairly easy to go 65 or 70 miles an hour on an interstate. But for an ADS vehicle, right now, where the technology is at, it is a big deal to go that fast. And in fact, initially our vehicle only traveled at 50 miles an hour, and we had to do a lot of testing and some tweaks to the software to increase that speed, so that today it can travel at 65 miles an hour when it's safe to do so. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. And in terms of the performance of the vehicle, of the automation and its ability to pick up other traffic and pedestrians, this is very much dependent upon the sensors that are being used on the vehicle and exactly how they are set up. So our vehicle has LiDAR and radar and other sensors, and how they're positioned, how many LiDARs you have, and what is the angle of coverage that your vehicle has really determines the vehicle's ability to pick up vehicles around you. Sherry gave us a great example of an intersection where she had to make a left turn, and it was more than a 90-degree left turn. It was sharper than that, and the sensors, as great as they are, they simply were not able to pick up cross traffic that was traveling at 55 miles an hour early enough to enable the vehicle to consistently cross that intersection under automation. And there were many situations in which we had to take over. So I think once again, the type of sensors you have and how they're positioned really has a big factor in the performance of this. And this was certainly one of the lessons that we learned as part of the testing that we've done.
Okay. Next question. They say, in looking at the example of the windshield glare, I can understand why the driver was concerned, but wouldn't the vehicle sensors and cameras be using a different angle? So perhaps the safety driver might be impacted by windshield glare, but the cameras might not, depending on their placement.
I can take that again, and maybe Sherry, you can add on to it.
Sure.
I think so we described to you the approach that we used for testing here at the University of Iowa. And this approach is very much based on the safety driver being involved in testing during all phases. But it also means that the safety driver has to feel safe. They have to feel confident. And if they're not feeling confident, whether or not the automation can do something or not, I think they're gonna err towards taking control. But Sherry, feel free to add anything there.
Yeah, I was actually the safety driver for this drive, and I think this really goes to my idea of exposure. I know where the vehicle is supposed to drive on that particular part of the road, and I knew it was going to need to nudge over, and I just don't have enough experience with vehicles approaching to know how and when it will, shift to the right so that it will be safe. I knew at the very point we were going to meet was basically right at the apex of that curve, and I wasn't feeling comfortable about it. I had another experience on the gravel where I left it in automation, but the vehicle approaching was slowing, and it clearly was moving to the right. So I felt more comfortable in that situation. I mean, we've had 2 instances with natural traffic. We set up a lot of scenarios with each other leading up to the drive. But as I said, we know that what the other person is going to do. So it's really just not the same. We just need additional exposure. And I think potentially our sensors maybe need to see a little bit farther around the corner.
Okay. Next question. This is 2 parts, so we'll answer the first one first. And then go on to the next one. Have any participants compared early rides to more recent rides, or have all participants been new riders each phase? Any data for this comparison, if it exists? So basically asking if the same individuals have participated early and then later.
Yeah, and no, the answer to that is no. Every participant has only driven or only ridden during one ride. There have been several people who have asked to come back to be able to ride at a later phase when the automation capabilities have increased. But for this particular demonstration, we are only having participants ride one time. Yeah.
Okay. The next part from that individual, the low anxiety levels to me point toward everyone feeling safe with the safety driver at the wheel and taking care to ensure safety of the drive. Have any participants been particularly concerned or backed out after first showing interest, and what was their reason?
So as far as I know, no one has backed out. No one has gotten onto the shuttle and changed their mind, if that's the question. For the most part, everyone who signed up has been very excited about it. And I agree completely with the perception that it's probably based on having a good safety driver there. A lot of people after the ride have mentioned that they were impressed with the safety driver's ability and that they felt completely comfortable. So I think some of the videos that we played that talked about how the riders would feel if the safety driver weren't there also would lead us to that explanation.
Okay. Next question, are changes or updates from phase to phase in the AV and mapping implementation of the vehicle noted in the published data? Can we see this influencing how data user may interpret changes in rider data? So asking about the data portal.
The changes and the updates from phase to phase, they are not going to be necessarily apparent just by looking at the data. So when the playground portion of the data portal is open, we will include some documentation that talks in more detail about what were the added capabilities, more than just sort of the name of the phase. We'll provide more information about that. That's a good question.
Okay, next question. How do you program for the Amish buggies since they don't look like a car or truck?
Yeah, I think Amish buggies are a really interesting challenge. From what we saw in the testing that we did, the perception module was able to recognize the Amish buggy as an object, as an obstacle. The buggies, these horse buggies, they typically drive on the shoulder. They're very seldom on the roadway. And I think that a lot more testing though would have to be done with vehicles with non-standard shapes and with like an animal attached to it, because it's it our testing has shown us that certainly the perception can pick up objects fairly well, obstacles fairly well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the automation software is going to respond in the most appropriate manner. And then there have been cases in which, again, odd-shaped vehicles, for instance, a truck with a flatbed. So this would be, a truck that has a flatbed on it, but if the flatbed has like a really tall object on the flatbed, and that object is placed not towards the back of the vehicle, but towards the front of the vehicle, it can really play havoc with the perception and how big it thinks that the vehicle is that we're following. So there's certainly been some very unique situations. But again, our testing is really about providing the data on the sort of the diversity of the intersections, but we haven't really, this project is not necessarily about really going into great depths with those types of interactions, but that data certainly is available.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one of the jobs of the co-pilot is to place markers into the data. So we have all of the interactions with horse and buggies and cyclists on the side of the road or pedestrians crossing. All of those are marked and they can be found. So if someone were interested in something in particular, they could go directly to that data.
Okay. Next question. What is it like? Can you talk a little bit more what it's like being a safety driver compared to manually driving a vehicle of that size? Sherry, yeah, there you
go. I've definitely been asked that before. I've had people ask me, so you're basically just sitting there, right? And that is completely false. As a safety driver is actually, I would say there's more responsibility than there is for a human driver. We monitor the environment like a human driver would. We control the vehicle, but we also have to kind of be in tune with the vehicle. I have to understand every situation, how the vehicle is going to behave. Maybe not every, but try out every situation to understand where it's going to brake. When does it see that traffic light? So that if anything is slightly different, I need to know that so I could, take back and drive manually. So increased awareness, vigilance for a safety driver for sure. We also have to have a little bit more patience because as some of our riders said, and as we know, there are places where the automation is rather conservative. It will come to a stop sign and might take a lot longer for it to stop. The drivers around us may look confused. They may wave us on and, and it just gets frustrating for them. But for us, we have to remain vigilant, but yet patient. And we deal with different things. We drive with both hands on the wheel at all the time. That's not really something I do as a human driver. I have two hands and I have one hand, so I can relax and things like that. So we've also over time kind of developed strategies on how to physically be able to handle the differences of driving manually versus being a safety driver with an automation on.
Okay. Yeah, we had another comment, well, more of a comment come in. Says the first appointment was canceled on site when she showed up to participate as the software had failed. I was rescheduled, but this event did cause me to be somewhat concerned about reliability. Omar, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely, you know, we've been doing this for about 1.5 years now. And when we first, we did so much testing. We did so much testing with the vehicle prior to the start of the data collection. But nevertheless, what we're trying to do really has not been done. And so we definitely encountered some issues in the beginning. And the software or the vehicle would keep finding new ways to kind of give us trouble. And many times it happened right before we wanted to do a drive. But I think what we've shown during the 5 phases of testing is that we've been able to bring the reliability of the vehicle up. And now it would be considered a big deal if the vehicle didn't work one day. But I want to reiterate, this technology is not perfect. It's not really ready for prime time, and it's certainly not ready to be put in the hands of, you know, people who are not like professionals at this point. But it shows a lot of great promise, and I think we just have to continue to test and continue to make things better.
Okay, that's all the questions that we've gotten. So unless any last minute ones come up as we're wrapping up here, we'll go ahead and wrap up. We also wanted to thank and acknowledge our sponsor, the US DOT, as well as our partners, the Iowa DOT, Hexagon Autonomous Stuff, and Mandalay Communications. So thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today. A recording of this will be available on our project website. If you have any other questions at any time, please feel free to contact us. There's contact information on the website. And please let us know if you have any ideas of anything specific you'd like us to cover in future webinars. We'd be happy to hear your ideas. So thanks again and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.